Well, hello and welcome back to our study in the book of Jonah. You'll remember last week I talked about how it's going to take us forever to get through this book if I don't move along faster or if I don't do the summaries of the chapters. And for those who responded, I had several responses. They said they want me to keep taking it slowly and deal with little chunks. One person even said it this way, I need the meat and potatoes, not the milk. I want the real stuff. And then somebody else said something along the lines of, hey, these little tidbits you're giving us really help me. And they want to grow. So that's what I'm going to do for the foreseeable future. So we're going to be looking at Jonah. And today I'm going to give you a special little teaching out of the book of Jonah that is what I call the practical side of the study of the book of Jonah. So we're going to stay in chapter 1 and move into chapter 2 for the next time. But let me ask you a question. What do you do when you find yourself in a tight spot or in a difficult place and you don't really know what to do? What do you do when your back is up against the wall or you feel like you're in a corner? How do you typically respond and handle those things? Or a better question might be, how would you like to handle those kinds of things in your life? I think we have two options really when I have discovered that we have two options that have proven for me to be helpful when we find ourselves in a difficult spot or a place we don't like to be, a desirable spot. One thing we can do, is we can fight it. We can just be mad and angry about it, complain about it to ourselves and to everybody around us. We can fight against it and do all those kinds of things. Or we can ask ourselves this question: what is God trying to teach me? Or what does God want to reveal to me? Or how does God want me to grow? How can I benefit from this particular struggle that I'm in right now? What can I learn? That's a question that I ask my kids a lot when they go through a difficult time. I say, well, what did you learn? They don't like that question very much, but my hope is that as they get older, they'll reflect back when they find themselves in a tight spot and say, well, what did I learn from that? How can I do better next time? How do I avoid the outcome that I'm achieving now in the future? So that's the question I want to ask you, and hopefully give you at least one answer for what do you do when you're in a difficult spot? What do you do when life is difficult for you? Now, to catch us up on where we are with Jonah, we said all along that it's one thing to be uncertain about the will of God and miss it. It's altogether different to know the will of God and refuse to do it. Jonah is that guy who represents the second. He knew exactly what God wanted him to do. He knew what God's will for his life was. He knew God's purpose, at least at this point in his life, and he just refused to do it. And sometimes we're like that. We know what God wants us to do, a certain direction he wants us to take, but we refuse to do it. So Jonah now is a runner. He's a renegade. He's running from God. He's a fugitive. And you'll remember weeks ago I said he turned left when he should have turned right. He went the wrong direction. He didn't want to do what God wanted him to do, plain and simple. And if we're honest, sometimes we find ourselves in that same circumstance. God reveals in the ways he does to us that he wants us to do something. We feel the impression in our hearts, our minds, those around us seem to encourage us in that direction too. And we feel like it's God's will, but it's not what we want to do, so we don't do it. So you remember that he runs from God, but God goes to his correction closet and pulls out a storm and sends a specific storm into his life. It's a storm that has Jonah's name on it, and he goes after Jonah. We also said that sometimes if we have a Jonah in our orbit, if we find ourselves connected to a Jonah, then our lives can get turned upside down as well. Or we take a Jonah into our lives who's running from God and has all kinds of problems, and we bring that person in, or we try to help that person when they're running from God, and we find that we get black eyes and bruises and things don't go well for us as well. Well, the storm is raging and all these people are experiencing difficulty because of Jonah in his life. They're in a tight spot. They're in a difficult place. And it's all because of Jonah. So I want to suggest to you that you and I do what they did. Jonah was the problem. They picked Jonah up and threw him overboard. They got rid of him. They didn't want to do it. Reluctantly, they did it. But when they did it, they discovered that things got better for them. Chaos left. The world solved and simmered down for them. So I want to give you a very practical reason about the Jonahs in your life. There might be a Jonah in your life right now, and God's best plan for you is to throw them overboard, to get rid of them. You got to get those Jonahs out of your life. So here's one of the classic Wilsonisms that I like to share with people. Maybe I've shared it with you before, but there basically are three reasons that people come into our lives. Either to bless us, to be blessed by us, or to teach us something. People come into our lives to bless us, to be blessed by us, or to teach us something. So sometimes these people come into our lives and there's a purpose behind it. God's given them an opportunity to bless us, and we want to receive that blessing, and joyfully, whatever that blessing might be, God's placed them in our paths to bless us. Then there are other people that God sends in our path, and God's intention is for us to bless them. We're not the receiver, we're the giver. We're going to bless them in some way, add value to their lives in some way. And then the third one, which we don't like as much, but then there's a way that sometimes they come into our lives and God says, I want to teach you something. I want you to learn a lesson here that you would not have learned any other way. And so we have to be willing to receive that lesson. And so ask ourselves, what did we learn in that experience? What did that person teach us? How can I look for that in the future? Don't get angry or mad or bent out of shape about that person, but rather ask yourself, what can I learn from that experience? And so they come into our lives to bless us, to be blessed by us, or to teach us something. And then the second idea I want to give you about people coming into your life, and when we find ourselves in a tight spot or difficult times, or we're feeling badly about Jonahs that enter and leave our lives, from a practical standpoint, remember this: people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. The trick is to determine which one of those they are. So sometimes people come into our lives for a reason. There's a purpose that they come into our lives. Whatever that purpose is, it's accomplished, and that's it. There's no long-term kind of relationship, hanging on or letting go. It's just the purpose was, there was a reason they came into our lives. And then, this is the sad one sometimes, but then people come into our lives for a season. It could be a short season or an extended season, but they're in our lives for a season, and then that season ends. And if we're the type of people who are emotionally connected to people, that's hard for us because we want that season to continue. But it rarely does. So you have to remember that there's a season sometimes to relationships. And then this is the one we all enjoy, or we'd like to enjoy. And that is, there's some people who come into our lives for a lifetime. A reason, a season, or a lifetime. And that lifetime could be that they are, with you all the time or around you a lot, and you are connected to them. And then there are others that you don't see them that often or talk to them, but boy, they're in your hearts, and you could pick up the phone and call them, and you hadn't talked to them in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or even 30 years if you're old enough. But you could pick right back up because in your heart, you love them and they love you, and maybe you've moved away or they've moved away, or circumstances are that you don't see each other as much, but they're there for a lifetime, and you love them and they love you. And so the whole idea is to remember that Jonah came into some people's lives for a reason, to teach them something. But I hope these other ideas that I gave you will be helpful as well. Well, we'll pick back up next week with old brother Jonah, and I think we'll find him floating in the water.